Hello and welcome to the Plaza Hotel. This is where we're going to spend quite a bit of time in chapter 4. Well, not very much time, just a little bit. I'm going to mix things up a fair amount and focus in particular on the artistry of Fitzgerald in The Great Gatsby in this chapter. And so the focus is going to be on structure. One way you might phrase this is we're going to start to enter the labyrinth of The Great Gatsby. We're going to pay attention to the way in which Gatsby's starting to put together, Fitzgerald starts to get together all the different threads he's been laying. You could also not do this, right? It's a very straightforward chapter, laying down the sequence of events that will culminate in chapter 5. If you're not interested in pursuing the nuances and you just want to read for plot, that's completely fine. But the point of these videos is to help you appreciate some of the artistry. And so that is what I'm going to ask you to engage in. As a quick review of chapter 3, the time was a Friday night in July. The location was Gatsby's house. Our main characters were the owl-eyed man, Gatsby, Nick, and Jordan. For symbols, we had the idea of the owl-eyed and the connection to wisdom and perception, and that was also associated with Gatsby's books, the fact that they were real. Our literary allusion was to, well, it was a historical allusion, to Belasco, the theater director, stage designer who created the hyper-realistic sets. And for vocabulary, we had innuendo, ascertained, corpulent, and credulity. Chapter 4 has one of the most elegant structures of all of the chapters, and it's drawn attention to. Fitzgerald's not being subtle here. There are moments of great subtlety in the Gatsby, but this is not one of them. So for each of the sections, there is a prominent page break. And this is what it looks like in the Google Doc, how I've put it in there to really draw attention to it. And if you're following along in the book because you happen to have gotten a copy, this is what it will look like. The first part is a list of guests, and what those numbers mean there are a reference to the edition of the book, if you happen to have that, or the page numbers on the Google Doc. The second part is in the morning, third part's at noon, fourth part's in the afternoon, and the fifth part is in the evening. And what we will see is that obviously we have the progression of a complete day. Let's start with chapter 4, part 1. On Sunday morning, while church bells rang in the villages along shore of the world, and its mistress returned to Gatsby's house and twinkled hilariously on the lawn. "He's a bootlegger," said the young ladies, moving somewhere between his cocktails and his flowers. Sunday mornings, you'll remember, this is the third day of the parties that begin Friday night, all day Saturday, and now Sunday morning. And we get one of these moments of rumor around Gatsby. He's a bootlegger. You might know this term from doing prohibition in history class, but a bootlegger is somebody that moves alcohol illegally, particularly during prohibition. Nick follows up by saying, "Once I wrote down on the empty spaces of a timetable the names of those who came to Gatsby's house that summer. It is an old timetable now, disintegrating at its folds, and headed, 'The schedule in effect, July 5th, 1922. This is not a very subtle point. July 5th is the day after July 4th. Independence Day. This is a book deeply rooted in investigating and critiquing and celebrating and engaging with the American dream. And so Nick makes this particular memoranda on the day after Independence Day. July 5th, 1922 was a Wednesday. He then launches into a catalog. And here we're going to have two literary terms, catalog and onomastics. A catalog is a list of names in a literary work, often with symbolic value, and onomastics is the analysis of names. And so it's unpacking what might be the symbolic value there. So let's look at a few of these names of the party guests. From East Egg, which you'll remember represents old money, inherited money, we have the Chester Beckers and the Leeches, Dr. Webster Civet, the Hornbeams and Willie Voltaires, Stonewall Jackson Abrams of Georgia, and the Hammerheads and Belugas. We start with a joke. Leeches, of course, are creatures that suck the blood. And one of the ideas here is that these people have sucked the blood of others in order to gain their wealth. Dr. Webster Civet is also a potential joke because Dr. Webster is the person responsible for the Webster English Dictionary, while civet is an East Asian cat creature. Well, it's just a cat mammal, cat-like creature. That's what I was going for. And then finally, we have the Hornbeams and the Willie Voltaires. Willie Voltaire was a French philosopher. And you get this connection then with the casual name of Willie and the highfalutin name of Voltaire. You have the presidential Stonewall Jackson Abrams that are coming in. And then we just jump straight into the fishery with the hammerheads and beluga, right? Hammerhead sharks, beluga whales. These are predators and massive. From West Egg, on the other hand, we tend to divide people according to race and nationality. And so we have the Poles and the Mule Readies. Mule Ready seems to be a pun on mule and to be ready, so hard workers. Poles refers to people from Poland. We also have Newton Orchid, who controlled films par excellence, and X-Housed and Clyde Cohen and Don S. Schwartz, The Sun, and Arthur McCarty, all connected with the movies in one way or another. So these people with their new money, it's coming from the arts and entertainment business. We have James B. Rotgut Ferret and the DeJongs and Ernest Lilly, who came to gamble. Ferret puts us kind of in contrast with civet, one a more exotic word for a mammal, and the other another one with a set of stereotypes around it. And these folks, they also shift into of theatrical people. When you're going through these names, pay also close attention to the way in which different ones die. There's a lot of death. So we then shift to the second part of the narrative. At 9 o'clock one morning, late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody from its 3-note horn. Beep, 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 or beep, beep, beep. However the horn goes. Go outside and ring your own horn. Here we start in the morning. That's what I want to emphasize there. And then I want to look at Gatsby's car itself. I'd seen it. Everybody had seen it. It was a rich cream color, bright with nickel, swollen here and there in its monstrous length, with triumphant hat boxes and supper boxes and tool boxes, and terraced with a labyrinth of windshields that mirrored a dozen suns. Sitting down behind many layers of glass in a sort of green leather conservatory, we started into town. This is an ostentatious vehicle, and I want to point out a few different things. One, it's swollen. There's something unhealthy about it. It's a monstrous length, right? We're in the world of creatures. And specifically, where do we go from those creatures? We go to the idea of the triumph. The triumph is an allusion to a Roman practice where a victorious general would return from victory and have a huge parade in Rome, and he would march his conquest in front of him. So there would be slaves and prisoners and enormous amounts of wealth. We then get the triple iteration of different types of boxes as though to emphasize what this is. Finally, we terrace everything, which might be a small reference to the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, but I want to emphasize that this is a labyrinth, or this key word. We're not in the maze, we're in the language of labyrinths and monsters. This has a mythic quality to it. And what's going on with all of these, we're having a set of mirrors of a dozen suns. It's blinding. You can't find your way. It also becomes a hall of mirrors, which you might associate with circuses and carnivals and false representations of yourself. Gatsby decides to have a conversation. Well, I'm going to tell you something about my life. He interrupted. I don't want you to get the wrong idea of me from all these stories you hear. Obviously, Gatsby is aware that people gossip about him. I want you to compare this, though, to an earlier passage. So I've written CF, which is a casual abbreviation you'll find in writing, and it simply refers to the Latin word confere, which means to compare something. So whenever you see CF, it means compare. And earlier on page 1 of the book, I was privy to the secret griefs of wild, unknown men. Most of the confidences were unsought. Frequently, I have feigned sleep. And the terms in which they express themselves are usually plagiaristic and marred by obvious suppression. We're about to see how much of the case that is for this particular moment. Is Gatsby himself guilty of this plagiaristic term of his confessions? And is he suppressing things? Well, here it comes. I'll tell you God's truth. His right hand suddenly ordered divine retribution to stand by. I am the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford, because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It is a family tradition. He looked at me sideways, and I knew why Jordan Baker had believed he was lying. He hurried the phrase, educated at Oxford, or swallowed it, educated at Oxford, or choked on it, educated at Oxford, as though it bothered him before. And with this doubt, his whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. What part of the Middle West? I inquired casually. San Francisco? I see. We start with Gatsby's emphasis on this idea of family tradition, ancestors, many years. This is the language of East Egg. This is the language of old money that he's trying to access. And he's using this idea of being at Oxford, being at one of the oldest educational institutions, to make that connection to a different quality of people, quality. But of course, then he slips. What part of the Middle West? San Francisco. You might have seen a map in your life. So the Middle West and San Francisco, the very western coast of the West Coast. Obvious suppression. A term that I want you to know here is tokens. Tokens are a literary piece of evidence that causes or generates recognition and persuasion, and is particularly common in Greek tragedy. He reached in his pocket, and a piece of metal slung on a ribbon fell into my palm. That's the one from Montenegro. To my astonishment, the thing had an authentic look. Orderi di Danilo, ran the circular legend. Montenegro, Nicholas Rex. Turn it. Major J. Gatsby, I read, for valor extraordinary. Here's another thing I always carry, a souvenir of Oxford days. It was taken in Trinity Quad. The man on my left is now the Earl of Dorchester. It was a photograph of half a dozen young men in blazers. 2 pieces of evidence. One, he claims to have served in the war, and he happens to have a medal from that. Something that helps us think about the possible links between this and tragedy is Nicholas Rex. You might have heard of a play called Oedipus Rex, and if you haven't, you're going to read it next year. And then he won it for his valor. So it looks real, right? He's providing evidence, tokens that he just happens to be carrying with him because it's something he always carries. This is weird. And the other thing he has is a photograph. Hey, yeah, I was at Oxford. Here's my picture evidence. Anybody that happens to be carrying evidence seems to have prepared to need to give evidence. So it should make you question authenticity. We then move to the 4th part of, that's incorrect, it's the 3rd part, which is at this speakeasy. A speakeasy is a place where you would have alcohol during Prohibition, where it was illegal. And it begins, roaring noon. In a well-fanned 42nd Street cellar, I met Gatsby for lunch. Blinking away the brightness of the street outside, my eyes picked him out obscurely in the anteroom, talking to another man. Mr. Carraway, this is my friend, Mr. Wolfsheim. A small, flat-nosed Jew raised his large head and regarded me with 2 fine growths of hair which were luxuriated in either. Oh my God, what a sentence. A small, flat-nosed Jew raised his large head and regarded me with two fine growths of hair which luxuriated in either nostril. After a moment, I discovered his tiny eyes in the half-darkness. A little later, Gatsby took an arm of each of us and moved forward into the restaurant, whereupon Mr. Wolfsheim swallowed a new sentence he was starting and lapsed into a somnambulatory abstraction. Notice the roaring noon. Earlier in the previous chapter, Nick was about to get drunk and said, roaring drunk. And we are in a cellar. That indicates this idea of the speakeasy. Later on, they're going to say they can't be at the Hotel Metropole anymore because that's a public place. And so here they have to be somewhere else. We move from bright to obscure. Whenever you're moving through shadows, through dark and light, pay attention to that kind of thing. And we meet this man, Mr. Wolfsheim, whose name is not going to be an accident, that it's Wolf. And he swallows a sentence where we just had the idea of Gatsby swallowing sentences. There's something that connects these two men, but he lapses into a somnambulatory abstraction. Somnambulatory is a great word that simply means sleepwalking. It's a Latin word, somnus, meaning sleep, and ambulatory, meaning walk. And there's something predatory about him where he fades in and out of aggression and awareness. There's a word that I want you to associate with Mr. Wolfsheim, and that is an oxymoron. Oxymoron is a Greek term meaning sharp or dull. And for example, and this is another abbreviation you might encounter in your readings in life, e.g. is a Latin phrase meaning exempli gratia. For example, literally it means for the sake of, gratia, unexample, exempli. Two common ones are to act naturally and a deafening silence. That's not how you spell deafening. Right, if you act, that means you're putting on a performance, and then natural means natural, right? So it's oxymoron, similar to deafening silence. Silence is something that is not causing noise, and deafening is a too loud noise. So here's the one we get. A succulent hash arrived, and Mr. Wolfsheim, forgetting the more sentimental atmosphere of the old metropole, began to eat with ferocious delicacy. His eyes, meanwhile, roved very slowly all around the room. He completed the arc by turning to inspect the people directly behind. I think that, except for my presence, he would have taken one short glance beneath our own table. The oxymoron I want to draw attention to is ferocious delicacy. On one hand, you have ferocious, attack, predatory. Delicacy, though, is great care, even elegance. And this is the way in which this man eats. So what I want to suggest is he's conjuring the idea of the wolf in sheep's clothing. How much of a predator is he? What is his role? Is he in disguise? All of these things should be here. Is he a predator or is he the delicacy? Think about him, and particularly because of his role as a gambler. What's his connection to Gatsby? This whole situation should make you on edge. In a few moments, Gatsby is setting up the meeting between what he wants Jordan to talk to Nick about. Why has it all got to come through Miss Baker? Nick asked. Oh, it's nothing underhand, Tia assured me. Miss Baker's a great sportswoman, you know, and she'd never do anything that wasn't all right. This is utterly false. As we've been learning from chapter 1, I had heard some story of her too, a critical, unpleasant story. And then chapter 3, at her first big golf tournament, there was a row that she had moved her ball from a bad lie in the semifinal round. She's a cheater at golf. She's a professional athlete, but she's surrounded by scandal of cheating. She is not a sportswoman who is completely devoid of scandal. And so something is happening here with this lie. We then shift very powerfully to the Plaza Hotel, and we enter a flashback. One October day in 1917, said Jordan Baker that afternoon, sitting up very straight on a straight chair in the tea garden at the Plaza Hotel. I was walking. This behind me is the Plaza Hotel. Notice how we learn what's happening with the parenthetical. Almost everything, though, this entire section is going to be a flashback from Jordan, where she relates growing up in Louisville, knowing Daisy and Gatsby's early courtship, and then Daisy's shift when Gatsby goes to the war, Daisy hooking up with and then marrying Tom Buchanan. And one of the things we learn about that marriage is Tom is a serial cheater. He's serial infidelity. A week after I left Santa Barbara, Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night and ripped the front wheel off his car. The girl who was with him got into the papers too because her arm was broken. She was one of the chambermaids in the Santa Barbara hotel. So he doesn't come out directly and say what is happening, but this is part of the language of innuendo that runs throughout the book. We learn another fact about Daisy at this moment. Daisy doesn't drink. One of the things that Jordan says about this is it's a great advantage not to drink among hard drinking people. You can hold your tongue, and moreover, you can time any little irregularity of your own so that everybody is so blind that they don't see or care. Well, we've already seen Daisy drink quite a bit back in chapter 1. But notice that this is the language of performance and deception. You can time any irregularity. What's interesting about this is we've also had one prominent character who does not drink back in chapter 3, and that's Gatsby. I wondered if the fact that he was not drinking helped to set him off from his guess, for it seemed to me that he grew more correct as the fraternal hilarity increased. What's going on with this idea of drink and deception and other elements of performance that we've had with, for instance, Mr. Wolfsheim and the World Series? We then shift into the final section, which is Nick and Jordan in Jordan's car. When Jordan Baker had finished telling all this, we had left the plaza for half an hour and were driving in a Victoria through Central Park. The sun had gone down. Notice it's now evening. The stars are up, the sun is down. We learned a couple facts. Gatsby bought that house so that Daisy would be just across the bay. So that explains why his house is located where it is and the green light that he was reaching toward. He wants to know, continued Jordan, if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and then let him come over. We are setting up events for the next chapter. She's not to know about it. Gatsby doesn't want her to know. You're just supposed to invite her for tea. We have the plan. And the last paragraph. We passed a barrier of dark trees and then the facade of 59th Street. A block of delicate pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices and blinding signs, so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arms. Her wan, scornful mouth smiled, and so I drew her up again, closer, this time to my face. We end with a kiss and a lot of very strange language. Facade means a false front. Disembodied face refers to a face that's not actually there, the fantasy that's there, and that's what Nick is setting up. He has the real face next to him versus this disembodied face. Of course, he does have a disembodied face because this whole other side narrative about a girl that he's left behind in Minnesota. Think about how we end this final chapter with a last reiteration of the idea of false versus true, something that's present versus something that's a fantasy. It's a very elegant chapter for this. I want to offer a brief summary here of something called the Aristotelian unities of action, place, and time. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher who specialized in all sorts of things, but one of the things that he thought about was the nature of literature, and he specifically had ideas about tragedy. Here's some quotes then. Tragedy is a process of imitating an action which has serious implications, is complete, and possesses magnitude. He also wrote, tragedy tries as hard as it can to exist during a single daylight period. If you want to read more about this, just head over to Wikipedia. Obviously, this is just a theory. He thought like an ideal tragedy took place in this way. Starts in the morning, and in the evening, a complete arc has happened. This is the tragic downfall. This chapter, I think, really works well for these three things. We start in the morning, getting in the car, we end with the kiss. We are concerned with setting up the plot for chapter 5, and we're gaining all of the revelations and suspicions around Gatsby. The whole thing takes place in a very narrow area in New York, and Nick is involved with each of the moments. So looking forward, what do I want you guys to think about? Well, Here's 4 critical questions. You just pick one and throw it up on the forum. Provide an interpretation of Wolfheim's molar cufflinks. What's going on in that entire scene? Nick was not looking at them, and Wolfheim draws attention to them. You'll want to look at the paragraphs before and after that. Critical 2. Do you see a connection between Gatsby's parties and Wolfheim's fixing the 1919 World Series? What is that connection? Critical 3. Why do you think Gatsby does not ask Nick for the favor directly? Why does he indirectly go through Jordan? And then critical 4. Do you agree that this chapter seems deliberately structured? Why else might Fitzgerald have made these choices? All right, I'll see you later on this week for chapter 5. And I think I'm going to break that up into 2 parts.